Thank you very much, Matthew, for the introduction, and thank you, Azia. And yes, indeed, Azia works also for the Pistolla Alliance. I work for the Pistolla Alliance as a consultant, so we interact, and I'm very grateful for that. So you set the bar pretty high. I'm trying to see if I can give the group a little bit of time, and like to see if it's possible still to have a couple of questions at the end. So the first point is, I am assuming that a lot of you are not familiar with the Pistolla Alliance. So if some of you are, my apologies, but I'd just like to spend a couple of words to introduce what it is and more or less how it works very quickly. I'd like to give a couple of examples of projects in what I would call the semantic space. A couple of them are ontologies, and then I'll spend a bit of time on a project that is on terminology. Again, I'll see if there's a little bit of time to interact. And if you have questions, maybe it's good if you put them in the chat. I will not be able to see the chat, but maybe we can look at it together afterwards. So first of all, the Pistolla Alliance is a global non-for-profit members organization. As it's mentioned already in the introduction, its mission is to lower the barrier to innovation. So just I'm going to give you some of my perspectives from this. So these are actually slides from the Alliance, but so pre-competitive does not mean indeed that people do not compete. It's rather that the actors concerned realize that in some occasions it's actually mutually beneficial for them to work on things that they will benefit from. So if you're making cars, sometimes it's good to pave a road together because you're selling cars. So you have an interest in making sure that the road exists. Just trying to give an example from another industry. So how does it work? Well, first of all, the kind of companies that are paying membership dues, they're listed here. But in practice, companies, organizations, they can also be non-for-profits. They can also be up to individual contributors. They pay a yearly fee. With this yearly fee, you're actually also signing up to a collaborative agreement. And when organizations want to come together, and I'll spend a slide on this later, they can actually together decide to finance a given activity or project in a nutshell. So a few words, few numbers, few metrics. So there are 17 out of the 20 top pharma companies that are part of the Alliance, but it's not all of it. It's an entire ecosystem. So there are many service providers. There are actually also research centers. There are patients organizations. There are foundations that are part of the Pistolla Alliance, and also individual contributors. What do? We create events. We create assets that can be used by sometimes the members alone, sometimes the entire community. And some of the things we're working on, actually, show you a couple of them, are publicly accessible, and you're more than welcome to use them and give feedback on those. So just a quick word for semantic disambiguation. So the Pistolla Alliance has a couple of instruments for people to get together. One of them is called projects. The other one are community of experts. And in both cases, they need to be financed by member organizations. And typically, the participation is open for members of the Pistolla Alliance. This is a super simplified version of what happens in reality. In reality, there are a lot of back and forths, but roughly speaking, the idea is that there's an idea, there's a problem typically that several member organizations have, and several champions come together and say, well, what if we did that instead? That's the beginning of an idea. And out of this, you could have a community of interest, and that's typically a platform for discussions. And this is a maturation process in which it becomes clear what the scope of a given project would be. So typically there's a challenge that's formulated, and the way to respond to it is to create a document, an artifact, whatever is required to bridge that gap. That will be the goal. Then we need to raise funds within the members to identify the resources. Typically there is a project facilitator, project manager, and then there can be a request for proposals for vendors to provide services to create whatever is needed. So that's typically a project. The other format we have are community of experts, and these are typically for the non-trivial, long-standing, and almost structural issues, for example, the implementation of fair data principles. So that's going to take a number of experts, a number of meetings to identify even what we can do together to make a dent. And it's not projects are not simple; they tend to be complicated, and community of experts tend to tackle more complex and more, let's say, hairy problems. That's just to give you a bit of a sense. And again, we have over 30 projects and community of experts going on, so I don't have the time to go into these, but several are relatively easy to find on the website. Just wanted to give you a sense. So this is a view of some of the activities in the so-called, I call it the ontology space, for lack of better words. So some of the frames are given by some of the work we do in the FAIR community of experts and the data governance community of experts. I will speak a bit later about a couple of these projects, but essentially it's a very complex environment with a lot of moving pieces, ranging from regulatory affairs, suppliers, the entire supply chain, and there's different forms, different bodies of knowledge that are actually part of this. It's research is important, but also you have manufacturing, you have operations, so many different moving parts. And this is just trying to show the complexity and how a lot of these are interrelated. There's another version of this previous graph. That's not a way to look at it in a more organized way, and looking from the top down. You would have, for example, and again, I'm going to skip here because of due of time, but at a very high level, the idea is to ground the logic or the relations or the modeling in a high level or top level ontology, for example, the basic formal ontology that all of you know. There are a lot of resources, a lot of semantic resources that are high level, and they're applicable to a very wide array of industries and activities. And for example, we can look at the OMG libraries, Nimble, IF Core, and the intention from the Pistolla Alliance members is not to reinvent the wheel when there are already activities that are ongoing. And again, a lot of you are maintaining and creating those assets, and that's extremely valuable. So I hope that's also recognized by different agencies and different governments in the world in a more consistent way. Just not to spend too much time on that, because a lot of the work you do is creating the bricks that are essential to create infrastructures that a lot of industries can benefit from. There are also, and I'm showing you now in the square or rectangle rather, activities that several industries or several industrial actors find important because maybe they don't find them directly in the outputs of research communities. So the three yellow bricks, and I don't know if you can see my cursor moving, they refer to just three examples of projects. These are actually ontologies. So the IDMP ontology, the CMC process ontology, and the clinical operations ontology that are the subject of either ongoing or past projects within the Pistolla Alliance. And I will speak very briefly to a couple of them. And there's also another project in the same area. It's not an ontology. It's a project to create a common terminology or shared terminology, and that's I will speak to this as well. And trying to keep an eye on time just to make sure that. So there's a lot of text here, and the intention is for you to be able to look through it afterwards. Then you have access to the PowerPoint notes, of course. But just in a nutshell, the purpose of the IDMP ontology is to create an actual ontology artifact based on an existing ISO standard, or rather, more precisely, a set of ISO standards. So once you have an ISO standard, it's great, but how do you create a version that is machine actionable and can be used to realize queries and things like this? So that was the purpose of the IDMP ontology project that started years ago, for which also the Alliance got a BioIT award a few years back. I'm just putting just some very quick points on this, just also to note that one of the challenges that the Pistolla Alliance has, and not just Pistolla Alliance, is the project is by definition a finite time exercise. And again, there's a problem, there's a solution. Okay. But once we create an ontology is a living artifact because, for example, if the ISO standards evolve, just to mention one, well, the ontology itself should evolve. But you could also have another other occurrences that make it so that the ISO commission itself decides maybe to modify some of the things we're doing, perhaps sometime even because of the work that occurred here. So you have this feedback loops. When the project is finished, you don't have a forum to do that. So what we're working on, and again, these are interactions that also involve several of you at some point, it's finding ways to maintain and to sustain these exercises. When I say exercise, of course, it's, once you have an ontology, you want to make sure that it's maintained afterwards of its creation, and that is a challenge because to create a financial model where different parties are motivated and rewarded to do that, it's not easy. But that's one thing we're exploring with the maintenance project of the Pistolla IDMP ontology project. Another example. So, depending on your background, depending on what you're looking at and your body of knowledge, you might more or less privy to different problems and solutions. So in the pharmaceutical industry, the entire process to create manufacturing processes to manufacture pharmaceutical products safely and according to regulations and quality and volume and whatever you want, it's a highly regulated and not simple one. Again, there are standards in this area in the CMC space, and one of the ideas, again, the project started a while back, was to take existing standards and codify them in an ontology. And the project started by extending the NIML ontology. That was phase 1. Phase 2 was actually built on more parameters. I'm sorry, because I realized there was a formatting issue. I'll try to fix it afterwards, but some of the text has been hidden. And there is an actual proposal to continue and to work to next year to further refine the ontology, but also implement elements that have to do with exchange data formats, for example, via FHIR. Now, one of the points here is that there are bodies of knowledge that are important for the pharmaceutical industry that sometimes are not represented in the research world because, well, it's not the purpose of the research world to do that. So that typically manufacturing is one of those examples. But even in these areas, it's important, some companies are realizing it's important to identify ways to codify this knowledge and make it more machine actionable. Now, I just gave examples of 2 areas, for example, the identification of medicinal products, so that's IDMP, and the CMC process. So in principle, these 2 things are connected by the very fact that, well, we want to manufacture what we would call a drug, for instance. If I say the word drug, it's pretty common. However, if I ask you what is a drug, which is literally a question that we asked experts about a year ago, the answer is not that trivial. So it happens that if you take a complex environment such as a biopharmaceutical company, that sometimes we're using words that have a relatively precise meaning in a given context. And the same way, similar concepts can be expressed in different ways. So the same concept can have different names, and different names can mean the same concept. And somehow human beings deal with this, more or less. And especially when they are in a given activity and body of knowledge and a given operational and cultural context, things are relatively clear. The problem is when you have handshakes. So when you're going from one area to another, so when you're going from research to early development to manufacturing to another part of the company. And one of the things is how do you connect those different languages, so to speak? And that's an important element just within one company, but then when you look at how do you exchange assets, data assets between organizations, for example, from one pharmaceutical company to a CRO, or maybe from one pharmaceutical company to another, not because they like one another, but sometimes they acquire one another. So you have a merger and acquisition exercise, now you're ingesting, literally ingesting another company. That also means their body of knowledge and their assets, their knowledge. How do you do that if you don't call the same things the same things. And apologies for the lack of clarity in that statement. So one thing that that was, in a nutshell, the idea of the PGO project, and PGO stands for Pharma-General Ontology. And just to be clear, we're not starting to create an ontology now. We're actually creating a terminology first. Was to use a bit the image, poetic image of the Rosetta Stone, which encoded several languages with the same messages. And the idea is, what if we had, instead of having this uncertainty, what if we identified existing sources? We don't want to create new definitions, but we try to curate from the existing ontologies, control vocabularies that exist, definitions of known concepts that are prevalent in a biopharmaceutical world, and so to say, okay, if we use these terms to mean these things, and we do this a priori, we don't need to do mapping afterwards, because we just know what the label means and what it refers to. So that's relatively simple as an idea, but to make it happen, it's a bit more complicated. There are different use cases that are theoretical, because again, we need to build this asset and then share it and have it adopted before we can see if it actually works. But one of the points, and I thought might be helpful for, or interesting maybe for this community, it's the ability, and that's what I was trying to show also earlier in this chart here, the ability to create kind of a terminology that would be connecting potentially different ontologies. And again, the idea is that if you have different domain-specific ontologies that might be referring to the same or similar concepts, it would be simply mapping them to PGO. The PGO terminology might actually help those to connect to one another. And again, I'm looking at time and seeing that I'm already over time. I'm just trying to go really fast with this. But just I'd like to leave you with this image that one of the aims of PGO would be actually to help a little bit disambiguate and to connect some different domain ontologies, because sometimes maybe somebody is talking about a product and somebody else is talking about a drug, but actually they're talking about a concept that similar enough at abstraction level to be considered the same, and that might help for further modeling. Another way to look at it is, imagine that you're looking at the entire pharmaceutical company from very far away, or imagine you have to explain how pharma works to a banker or to somebody that builds cars or aircraft. You don't want to go to the level of detail that the domain ontologies get to, but you want to be able to provide a overarching, accurate, but still high-level view of the field. So that's what we're trying to capture with the terminology of PGO. So admittedly, so this is an idea. This to give you an idea of a super simplified process. So it's collaborative. So there is a governance. So the sponsors, the companies that are providing financing for this project. And again, it's done differently in different Pistolla Alliance projects, but the principles are similar. So the companies that pay typically have champions or representative. And this group collectively forms the governance of the project. So I am actually the coordinator or project manager of PGO. So my reference group is the steering group, and there are proposals of what are the things that should be defined, what are the core concepts in PGO terminology, and they vote and they say, okay, this is what we would like to get started with. And then my job is to connect to experts and say, okay, let's take drug, for example. What would be a good definition of drug that we can find in the public domain? And then different experts meet over this. Then we have meetings, and then we come up with the proposal. Well, it looks like this would be the best or the least inappropriate definition of drug that we can find in the public domain. This is brought up to the steering group, and then if they have no objections, it's approved. And if they have objections, it goes back to expert groups, and then we have other meetings. So that's the kind of process that we set up. That's a view of the first batch. I wouldn't even call it a beta version. It's like a pre-alpha, but we're trying to to connect with the global community, and that means you. So this was published a few months ago. It's accessible via GitHub. At the moment, it's basically a list of 17 terms with a label, the definition text that we recommend. This is not something we came up with. This is actually taken from existing sources, and we tell you where does it come from and how to find it with the URL/IRI. We would like to have GUPRIs, but not everything is at that stage yet. And we don't want to create new identifiers when we can. So at the moment, these are all publicly defined identifiers. Just wanted to give you a sense of where we are, what we're trying to do, where we're moving next. So if I sketch like knowledge domains on this axis, so research and early development will be a knowledge domain, but so we supply chain and distribution. So I think that there's quite a lot of abundance of terminology in this area, but maybe not so much here. We're also starting in this area because historically, the assumption was that there were some terms, for example, protein, that would be less prone to disagreement there. So we try to build on a common understanding and try to build a culture also for building those resources together. And in terms of semantic complexity, the simplest thing is a control vocabulary, basically a list of terms, and say this is what we mean by that. And when we mean by that, it's a human readable text. Unfortunately, it's very far from an ontology where we actually have relations and very clearly codified types of relations. So there's not yet an agreement on this. The agreement is to build a terminology, and we're expanding that. So in the first phase of the project, we identified 17 concepts. We know that we need more, and we're actually working on another batch for phase 2. At the same time, we're having conversations saying, what is the minimal amount of modeling that will make this helpful and useful to a broader community, which also includes you. So it's not excluded that we start doing a bit more than just a list of terms and their definitions. Again, the key driver, this is the teeny bit, and then I understand I'm slightly over time, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. But what we're working on is a set of LinkML schemas that we can use then to automatically generate OWL files, but also SSLM mappings. So we're behind the scenes. We're trying to build a bit more to integrate existing sources of knowledge, and you can see some known resources here from FIRE to the Obo Foundry ones. So again, we're not trying to build something new. We're just trying to identify bricks that are helpful and then collecting them and putting them together so that they could form a reference set of terminology at first, and then at some point perhaps also of relations that could help map all of this and make it more actionable. If you want to get involved, would love to hear back from you. So you can actually look at the GitHub and then you can leave comments there. We have a cycle where it's going to take another few months before we can get back to you, but to actually modify the assets, it's going to take months. But please, we're very interested in hearing your point of view. Some of you might be part of Pistolla Alliance members, in which case you're really welcome to become an expert or part of the expert group. And if some of you are interested in other questions, just let me know and reach out by email, and I'll see what I can do to get you on board. I wanted to thank all the steering group members. Azia, she's actually coordinating the Pistolla Alliance semantic projects, and my colleagues Birte Nielsen and Aditya Tyagi, they are the project manager of CMC Ontology and IDMP Ontology. And Christian Weber is keeping us straight, managing the entire portfolio of projects in the Pistolla Alliance. With this, thank you. And I don't know if there's any time left for questions. I know I'm